Hello everybody, welcome back for another episode of Modeling from the Ensign's Chair. This is episode 4 of the Motion Picture Enterprise Refit Smoothie build. I know that all my videos have been long, and the last one I said was try to make short and it ended up being really long. This one I promise you is going to be short. All I'm going to talk about today, mainly because I'm waiting on a number of things before I move on with this project, but there's a couple things I'm working on right now that I want to go over real quick. I mainly want to talk about today is the Paragrafix photo etch set for redrilling your windows on your secondary hull and your connecting dorsal. And I just want to go over a couple things with that and point out some issues with it, and maybe talk about a couple tips to maybe help you that I've discovered to help keep from making mistakes that I've made. So give me a minute, I'm going to put you on the table and we'll get to work. Alright, so the first thing I want to talk about is the Paragrafix template for redoing or redrilling our dorsal windows. So there's a couple windows on here now. I went ahead and filled them all in and redrilled all of them. It turned out pretty well. I like it. But one thing I noticed though when I started comparing the studio model photos to this Paragrafix part is that some of these windows are already going to match up with the Paragrafix part. You don't even have to redrill them. So you can kind of save yourself a little bit of trouble by only doing the windows you really have to. And to make it a little easier, what I did was I pulled apart from the current repop to show you which windows are really the only ones that need to be moved. So if you look at this first row here, really that just needs to be moved back along with that second row, and you can see where they're repositioned. I marked it in red where the Paragrafix template says to relocate them to. So this whole line of windows here moves back. Then this window back here on your leading edge of the dorsal needs to move back just a hair, just a little bit. And then of course both your windows up here are going to come down just a little bit and relocate. But this one is really just coming down a little bit. It's not even moving much. But I noticed when I redrilled these that a lot of the holes, when I redrilled them, well, not a lot of them, but a couple of them, I drilled right back in the same place they were. Namely, this one, and these two up here pretty much stay in the same spot. So you really don't need to go through trouble of filling those in and redrilling them unless you really want to. You can get away with just redoing this window, these two windows, this line and this line. And then for here at the Photon docking port here, honestly I like the way it was before I redrilled the holes. Wrong template, sorry. Because when you look at the studio model, these windows should be a little bit further apart, and I don't know if you can make that out in the studio model here, but these are kind of close now, whereas before, just give you kind of a comparison. This is the repop, and then this is my smoothie that I've already redrilled the holes on. But you can see how it changes the location of those holes. And it brings them kind of closer to the docking port there, and also brings them closer to each other. This one really doesn't even move much. So I really would have left this alone. I wouldn't have done this at all because I liked the spacing on the way it was before I re-drilled it comparing to the studio model than I do now. Now to me these look a little closer than what it shows in the studio model. And maybe it's just because of the difference in scale, but I mean even zooming into it, it just looks a little bit closer than what it should be. So up to you what you want to do with that. The only thing I'm going to suggest with these, I know before I said I had just been filling these in by without drilling them out and putting the epoxy in them, and then letting it set up, sanding it down, and then re-drilling the holes where I needed to. That was fine for this one, but what I noticed when I started looking at this is because this is a smoothie, you don't have the panels on it to worry about. If you're not filling in and sanding down the panels on the repop, you're going to have a problem when you go to fill this in from the front and then go to sand it, because if you sand too much, you're going to start taking away that detail. My suggestion is, and what I started doing on some of these, drill these holes all the way through, put a piece of tape over the front, and put your epoxy in the backside and let it fill in that way. That way, once you pull that tape off, once it hardens and dries, you pull that tape off, it'll be mostly smooth, as long as it filled in all the way. I do have, on my other secondary hull, I have one where the hole didn't completely fill in, but I'll have to go back and fill in from the front now. But for the most part, you should be able to get these to fill pretty well and smoothly already. And then all you got to do is some minimal sanding, and hopefully you won't have to worry about taking away any of those panels. Like I said, if you're not taking those panels off already, you don't want to have a problem where you've got a big smooth spot from where you had to do a lot of sanding. So like I said, my suggestion is drill these holes through. If you're going to fill them in, drill them through, put a piece of tape over the front here, and then fill the epoxy from the back, let it harden up, pull your tape off, and then you should only have to do, like I said, minimal spot sanding. You should be able to get away with. These ones down here I wouldn't even mess with if I had noticed this before. But that's the issue I had with that. So just a little suggestion there, if you want to do that. But I've done both of my dorsal sections, and I like the way that the windows line up better now compared to the studio model than they did before I did the Paragrafix kit on it. Like I said, it's just some windows that you don't need to bother filling in because you're just going to re-drill the holes right in the same spot. So that's done, and that's ready for me to start working on now and get that together and start getting it lit up. And I'm really looking forward to putting that Photon part that I got from Wiley Cody's workshop in here and seeing how I can get that to light up. So that's going to be nice to work with. The other part I want to talk about, and the one I had the biggest problem with, is the dorsal section here, or the not the dorsal but the secondary hull. The secondary hull, for the most part, and let me change my view on the computer here and pull up the photo of the studio model for the secondary hull. But when I'm looking at this, I know it's kind of hard to make out in the camera, but most of your panel lines and your windows are actually lining up where they should be. This window may be a little low, but and these windows are a little further forward than what they should be. And these windows line up good. These windows line up good. The only major issue I see with the mold the way it is all these oval windows. First of all, these windows here are not even, they should be the same size from what I'm seeing in the studio model. And it gets progressively smaller the further forward you get. So those windows there definitely would need to be filled in. These ones need to be filled in. All these ovals are way oversized, especially this one. Oh my, when you look at the studio model, that is way larger than what that should be. So if for no other reason, I filled it in just because these oval windows are just way oversized on the mold. So and this is where I filled it in. I still got some more sanding to do to it, but it's all filled in. And the issue I started coming across when I started looking at this Paragrafix template, and I've cut it in half, and I'm going to explain to you why here in a minute. But the main issue was when I put it in place the way that the directions are telling me to, and I line it up, the problem is when you look at, and I'm going to do this in sections, so I got that in place. So looking at this back half, if you line it up the way that they tell you to, if you can see these two smaller windows back here, and if not, you can always pull this up on your own computer and look at it. You notice on the Paragrafix template, those two oval windows are way too far back when you put this where it's supposed to be. According to the images of the studio model, this oval window, this forward oval window should be under this corner where your strong back is going to be. So it should be about right there is where your window should be. But if I line this up the way the Paragrafix kit says to, that window is going to be way far back. Now the other problem is once you do that, and there's really, no matter how you line this up, these three windows on the Paragrafix kit are supposed to fit inside of this panel grid here. as you can see in this photo here. You see those 3 windows there. And I know, like I said, that might be a little hard to make out on the camera, but you can pull these up online and see what I'm talking about. Well, on the Paragrafix kit, they are way too far apart. I can't even fit all these. They won't even fit inside that grid at the same time. So this kit, this grid one right here is just completely wrong. These windows are too far apart. They should be closer together to fit inside this grid. And then you see your furthest back window is supposed to be near this grid line, and then you've got quite a gap from this forward window to that one. Well, I can't even fit them all inside that grid pattern. And like I said, it's not because the grid lines are off, because when I look at this and compare it to the studio model, the grid lines are actually falling where they should in relation to where your strong back is and where your warp pylon is going to be. So the issue is that there's too much space in here between these windows. So the only solution I can think of for that is I'm going to have to kind of eyeball it and figure out where to drill those 3 windows properly to match up with the studio model. Because then when you look at it again, these 2 windows, if I line it up the way I need to get these windows proper, well, then you end up with this window and this window on opposite grid panels, and they're not supposed to be. They are supposed to be on the same grid panel. So there's really no way to use this template and get all these windows to line up where they're supposed to be. So like I said, I'm just going to have to I guess eyeball it and figure out where I need to place each set of windows in order to get them to line up properly inside the grid pattern. So it's a little bit of a headache, but and the one in the front isn't as bad. If I line this up where it needs to be, these windows, which are pretty much just this window, that window, that window, and then your ovals up front. I got to push it a little bit further forward than what it's supposed to be, but I can just barely get this window and this window to fall inside the bottom corners of that grid panel. So yeah, I might have to move this around a little bit to get these windows where they need to be. So it's a little bit more work than what I was expecting, considering that I would have figured that this was supposed to line up to give you your window pattern, put your windows where they're supposed to be, and it doesn't. So actually the windows are more accurate to me the way that they're molded in than when you start to use the Paragrafix part. So like I said, really the only issue with the mold is these windows are way oversized. These aren't even properly sized in correlation to each other. So, but other than that, all your other windows are pretty much where they need to be. Whereas now, I've got to re-drill these and figure out where to drill them to have them sitting properly. So, that's going to be a little bit of a headache I'm going to have to work on. But other than that, like I said, really this issue, that's all I want to talk about, was dealing with those Paragrafix parts on the secondary hull and the connecting dorsal. We've got some more windows to drill. We got to re-drill some on the saucer sections, but I don't want to do that until I get my my window panels, my replacement window panels in, which I should have later this week. So once I get those in, hopefully next episode I'll be able to start working on those. The only other thing I want to talk about real quick is, and this really isn't something I was planning on messing with much until I got the 2 sections of the secondary hull together, but I got the piece from Wile E. Coyote's workshop, the deflector dish. And you'll notice if you try to fit it on the model with the way it is, it doesn't quite fit, and that's because this part of the ring is actually on the mold. So what you have to do is you have to cut this little ring off. All right, this little depressed section here, you have to cut that off. And all I did was took my cutting blade and just went along and cut off. And remember, I always say, cut off, don't cut off more than you need to. Cut off less and leave a little room, and then that way you can go in and sand and make adjustments if you need to. So you cut that section off, and just for comparison, what you get is you get that right there where you don't have that section on there. So you cut that off, and now this part, Michael Wiley told me it was going to take a little build up to get this to size properly, but you can see even without any additional putty work, it actually fits on there pretty nicely. So the only one I really see is going to need some buildup is the bottom part here. It's going to need a little bit of buildup, but yeah, it fits on there. Once you get that section off, it actually fits on there right nicely without even doing additional work. So it shouldn't take a lot to get that in place. But anyway, that's it for this episode. That's really all I wanted to talk about, was just pointing out some of the issues with the Paragrafix kit and what I'm dealing with right now as far as getting this sanded smooth and trying to make all these windows line up to where they need to be. But again, these photos of the studio model from the Christie's from the Christie's auction back in, like I said, I think 2006. They're readily available online, so you can do a search for them and find them and take a look at them yourself and kind of compare and see what holes maybe you want to redo and which ones you don't. Like I said, definitely I think the oval windows need to be redone because they're way oversized. Other than that, the smaller windows, again, if I had looked at this before I'd filled these in, I would have left the smaller windows alone and just redid the oval windows. But here I am in my hell, so I'm gonna be working on that, and next episode hopefully I'll have those other parts and we can start looking at maybe starting to get some of this together finally instead of all these alterations I've been making. So until then, keep modeling.